imagine waking up in the middle of the night and noticing your reflection is still staring at you, even after you've already turned away? That's exactly what happened to Rebecca 3 nights after playing the Bloody Mary ritual during a storm. At first, she thought it was only fear, until mirrors around her house started changing on their own, and something began knocking from the other side of the glass every night at 3:13 a.m. Bloody Mary, Season 1, Part 1, The Sleepover. The storm arrived just after midnight. Rain hammered against the roof, while thunder rolled across the sky, hard enough to shake Natalie's old house. The power had already gone out across the neighborhood, leaving the entire street swallowed in darkness, except for occasional flashes of lightning. Emily sat beneath a blanket beside the fireplace, while candles flickered around the living room, casting moving shadows across the walls. At first, the girls laughed while telling ghost stories to pass the time. Stories about haunted rooms, abandoned hospitals, and strange creatures seen in forests late at night. Then Natalie mentioned Bloody Mary. The mood changed immediately. Rebecca rolled her eyes and called it childish, but Natalie didn't smile. She stared toward the dark upstairs hallway before quietly saying her older brother tried the ritual years earlier, and afterward refused to sleep near mirrors ever again. Nobody laughed after that. 20 minutes later, the 4 girls stood inside the upstairs bathroom, holding candles, while rain tapped softly against the window. Natalie explained the ritual in a whisper. Stand in front of the mirror, turn off the lights, say her name 3 times. But whatever happens, don't turn around. Rebecca stepped toward the mirror first. Bloody Mary. Nothing happened. She laughed nervously and repeated it louder. Bloody Mary. The candle flames flickered violently. Emily suddenly felt the room temperature drop. Rebecca hesitated before whispering the final words. Bloody Mary. For half a second, the bathroom lights flashed despite the blackout, and in that single moment, Emily saw a tall woman standing behind them in the mirror. Long black hair covered her face completely. Then darkness returned. Part 2. The 4th reflection. The girls screamed and spun around, but the bathroom behind them was empty. Emily slowly looked back toward the mirror and felt her stomach drop. There were only 3 reflections staring back. Rebecca's reflection was gone, completely missing from the glass. Then suddenly, it reappeared again. Rebecca stumbled backward, breathing hard, while Natalie whispered that something was wrong. Before anyone could move, another face slowly appeared behind Rebecca's shoulder in the mirror. Pale skin, hollow eyes, a twisted smile stretched impossibly wide beneath wet strands of black hair. Rebecca screamed as the mirror cracked violently down the center. Every candle inside the bathroom went out at once. Darkness swallowed the room instantly. The girls ran downstairs in panic, nearly tripping over one another. Rebecca kept repeating, "Did you see her?" while Natalie locked every door in the house. Thunder continued rolling outside, while the living room sat in silence. Then Rebecca suddenly realized she left her phone upstairs beside the sink. Part 3. The footsteps upstairs. Nobody wanted to return upstairs, but eventually Rebecca forced herself to go. Emily reluctantly followed her into the dark hallway. Halfway toward the bathroom, they noticed wet footprints covering the wooden floorboards. Bare footprints leading away from the bathroom toward the bedrooms. The bathroom door stood slightly open now. Inside, the mirror above the sink had shattered completely. Rebecca grabbed her phone from beside the faucet, and the screen lit up instantly. A photograph filled the display. It had been taken only moments earlier. The image showed the hallway outside the bathroom, and standing at the far end was a tall woman with long black hair hanging over her face. Emily slowly looked up from the screen toward the actual hallway. Nothing stood there. Then lightning flashed outside the window. For one horrifying second, a pale woman appeared near the staircase. Her head tilted unnaturally sideways, while a huge twisted smile stretched beneath her hair. Darkness swallowed the hallway again, but this time the girls could still hear footsteps. Slow, bare feet moving softly across the floor toward them. Part 4. Don't look into mirrors. After that night, Rebecca changed completely. She covered every mirror inside her bedroom with blankets and towels. She refused to enter bathrooms alone and panicked whenever she accidentally saw her reflection after dark. Sometimes she claimed the reflection moved slightly slower than she did. Other times she woke up screaming because she saw someone standing behind her inside the mirror. Emily tried convincing herself it was only trauma from the storm and fear, but strange things started happening to her too. Mirrors fogged up without reason. Reflections sometimes smiled a second too late. One night, Emily woke around 3 a.m. and noticed her bedroom mirror uncovered, even though she remembered covering it before sleeping. Written faintly across the glass were 4 words traced through the condensation. Don't say her name. Then her phone rang. Rebecca was crying hysterically. She's getting closer every night, she whispered. I can hear her breathing behind me. Part 5. The locked bedroom. 3 days later, Rebecca disappeared. Police found her bedroom locked from the inside. The windows were sealed shut. There was no sign of forced entry, and no indication she had ever left the room. But the blankets covering her mirrors had all been ripped down, and deep scratches covered the walls around them. One mirror remained untouched. Across its surface, someone had carved a message so deeply the glass nearly shattered. I'm still here. After Rebecca vanished, Natalie refused to speak about Bloody Mary ever again. The girls drifted apart, and Emily spent years trying to forget what happened. But late one rainy night, almost 6 years later, Emily accidentally looked into a dark mirror after midnight. For only a second, she saw Rebecca standing behind her reflection, pale, smiling weakly, trapped somewhere far behind the glass. And standing beside her was the woman with long black hair. Bloody Mary, Season 2, Part 1. Reflections don't lie. Emily tried ignoring what she saw that night, but the visions continued. Mirrors reflected movement that didn't exist. Sometimes she caught glimpses of Rebecca standing silently behind her before disappearing again. Then came the knocking. Every night, around 3:13 a.m., something tapped softly against the mirrors in her apartment. 3 slow knocks, always from inside the glass. Emily started researching the Bloody Mary legend online and discovered dozens of stories almost identical to Rebecca's disappearance. Missing people, broken mirrors, reflections behaving independently. One forum post mentioned an abandoned church outside Blackwood County, where the original ritual supposedly began centuries earlier. Part 2. The Woman Behind Glass. Emily traveled to Blackwood during another violent storm. Deep within the woods, she discovered the abandoned church, half collapsed beneath overgrown trees. Inside, she found old journals written by a priest from the 1800s, describing a woman accused of witchcraft who was murdered after villagers claimed mirrors changed around her presence. According to the journal, her spirit never died properly. Instead, it became trapped between reflections. The priest warned that repeating her name in darkness opened a path between worlds. Emily also discovered references to other missing victims who were supposedly taken through the glass. Then she heard movement upstairs inside the church. Slow footsteps dragging across wood. Part 3. Midnight Rituals. Determined to save Rebecca, Emily performed the ritual again, alone inside the abandoned church at midnight. Candles surrounded the cracked mirror she found hidden beneath old cloth inside the basement. Rain hammered against the building while she whispered the name 3 times. At first, nothing happened. Then her reflection blinked several seconds too late. Emily froze. Her reflection slowly smiled while she herself remained motionless. Then the reflection lifted one hand independently and pointed behind her. Emily turned around. Nobody stood there, but when she looked back toward the mirror, her reflection was gone completely. Something else now stood inside the glass, tall, pale, smiling. Part 4. The other side. The mirror surface suddenly rippled like water. Emily stumbled backward as cold air flooded the basement. Through the glass, she saw another version of the church existing in darkness on the other side. Endless hallways stretched behind the reflection, while distant figures wandered silently between mirrors. Among them stood Rebecca, pale and frightened. Emily reached toward the glass, while Rebecca begged her not to come through. "She wants you here," Rebecca whispered. Suddenly, the woman with black hair appeared behind Rebecca and wrapped long fingers around her shoulders. The mirror cracked violently, the candles went out, and the basement door slammed shut upstairs. Part 5. Don't say her name again. Emily realized too late that Bloody Mary never wanted victims to summon her. She wanted them to open doors. Every ritual weakened the barrier between worlds. Every mirror became another entrance. Desperate, Emily smashed the mirror with a metal pipe. But instead of shattering, normally, the glass screamed. Thousands of cracks spread across the surface, while dark liquid poured from inside the reflection onto the basement floor. Rebecca reached toward Emily one final time before vanishing into darkness behind the glass. Then something else stepped forward. The woman emerged slowly from the broken mirror, impossibly tall, with wet black hair hanging over her face. Emily ran through the church, while every reflective surface around her showed the creature following silently behind. She barely escaped before the building collapsed during the storm. Authorities never found evidence of anyone else inside, but years later, strange stories still surround Blackwood. People claim mirrors sometimes fog up on their own during storms, and if someone whispers Bloody Mary 3 times after midnight, a second reflection may appear behind them, smiling from the darkness.